Hello mammals, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about lost birds. Now this isn't about what to do if you lose a bird. That's a different subject. This is just about the subject in general. And unlike most of my videos, I hope this particular video gets shared in a very broad way. I hope that non-falconers get a chance to see it. I hope that bird rehabbers, I hope that people who work at zoos, I hope government officials and wildlife officers, even bird watchers, I hope they all get a chance to see this and have a better understanding. So, first of all, falconry is a ridiculous sport when you think about it. To train a bird, whether it's a captive bred bird or a bird from the wild, to train a bird that doesn't communicate in the way mammals do, and to train it to fly totally free, to hunt and come back is pretty amazing. Most non-falconers don't understand just how much work goes into properly training a bird of prey. And there's so many risks. I have had birds shot. I have had birds chased off by hawks and eagles. And I know other people who have had birds killed by hawks and eagles that they've been training. Everything can end in a moment. So we take our flying very seriously, we take our training very seriously, and not only do we train them, but we have other methods. Traditionally, in the old days, bells were made. Very special bells. It's not just a jingle bell. They're made so they can be heard a very long ways away, and they have a narrow slit with two tiny holes as opposed to a jingle bell. A jingle bell, a bird can get its beak stuck in it. So there were professional bell makers in the old days that's all they did was make bells for the falconers of the Middle East and of Europe. Now, in addition to that, we have radio transmitters of all different kinds that have a radio frequency. We also now have GPS transmitters. These are incredibly expensive. They take a lot of work and maintenance, and they're a gift that we have them. But every effort is made when you're flying a bird to not lose it. Now, accidents can still happen. Birds can still get lost. I acknowledge that a falconer whose sponsor is not helping them the way they should. You could have some sloppy training and have a bird get lost. But there's a couple things you need to remember. Two biggies. First of all, if you ever see a bird loose with equipment, you don't know for sure that it was a falconer's bird. Second of all, you have to always remember, wherever you find that bird flying around with equipment, that bird may have come from another state. You don't know how long it's been wild. And you don't know if it's in the process of migrating. You could be in the United States and it could have migrated from Canada. So part of why I'm sharing all this, there's a picture that has been going around the internet. I've seen it before, and it's horrific. It's a picture of an American kestrel wearing these jesses that, first of all, when you see a bird loose with equipment, that's always very bad. But all the more so when you have a bird with equipment that's clearly not up to legal standards. No falconer would ever allow their apprentice to put jesses like this on a kestrel. These jesses will likely get caught, tangled in a tree or something, and the bird will die. So, understandably, when people see something like this, they get upset. Falconers get upset, non-falconers get upset. But I'm a bird watcher and a bird photographer independently of being a falconer. So I'm on a lot of public boards where I'll see other bird photographers post. And anytime a bird with jesses is sighted, the anti-falconry sentiment is through the roof. And you have people ranting on how horrible and irresponsible falconers are. And they never factor in those two things I mentioned, especially that it might not be a falconer's bird, and even if it is, you don't know the whole story. So a couple of examples to be aware of. First of all, there are a lot of other people that care for birds of prey with equipment on that are not falconers. Zoos and aviaries, wildlife rehabilitators, wildlife educators, they often will have their birds jessed. I live in Utah, and we have a world-class aviary. They are top-notch and great at everything they do. And even in spite of that, over the years, they have lost a number of birds. Usually they end up recovered, but they've been anything from a bald eagle that was gone for about a month to a raven that ended up flying to the state capitol building and was tapping on the windows. That's how they got alerted to it, to even a flamingo. Now, in the case of a bird of prey, if somebody had seen an eagle or a hawk from that aviary with jesses on, they would understandably jump to the conclusion, oh, it's from a falconer. So that's important to remember. You'll also have to remember, especially with kestrels, that there are people practicing falconry illegally. The laws in the United States are set up on the old apprenticeship system, where there's an apprentice class that has to serve an apprenticeship under a general or master class falconer that sponsors them. They help that apprentice learn the ropes. They make sure they don't make any mistakes, any big ones especially. They make sure that their equipment is legal and up to legal code. Now, that kestrel picture I showed you, those jesses are illegal, 100% illegal, and would never be acceptable. No sponsor would ever allow that. But what happens a lot of times is people have common species that are closer to humans, kestrels, Swainson's hawks, red-tailed hawks, that nest near people. You might live in a neighborhood where a kestrel had a nest and one of the babies jumps out at the brancher age, and you as a kid might be like, hey, cool, I've heard of falconry, I fancy myself a falconer. They might go online, look up some basic equipment, and make these grotesquely illegal jesses, put them on a kestrel, fly it around. You're training it, feeding it hamburger, it's unhealthy, and a few weeks later it takes off on you because you didn't know what you were doing, of course. Now bird watchers see that kestrel out there and they're like, oh, falconers are so irresponsible. This happens really quite often, and you never know. So that is something important to remember. Well, I want to show you the basics of equipment and then tell you a very important story. So basically, in early falconry, the jess system we had was called the single-piece jess. Now, a single-piece jess we don't use really anymore. It weaves in and out of itself. It's around the leg, and it doesn't come off unless you cut it off or unweave it off. Now, in most states, this jess is legal only when your bird's not being flown, like for an education bird that can't fly, or during the summer when you're molting your bird and not going to be flying it, you could have it in the mews wearing such a thing. But basically, we falconers opt not to use this jess because it doesn't come off. So if your bird's flying around with this jess, it could get tangled into things. Now, these jesses I'm showing you, by the way, are not to accurate scale. I just threw them together for this video out of some cheap leather because I didn't want to use my good kangaroo hide for this video. But so a single piece jess like this could be a death trap for a bird. So we don't use them and we don't fly them on birds. Now, the kind of jess we typically use, the jess system, and again, this is not to scale, it's called an Almary jess, and it consists of a grommeted anklet that wraps around the bird's legs that has cuts top and bottom to keep there from being abrasions, and then through the grommet, the jess slides through. Now, that jess has a slit that we use to connect the swivel and the leash and the other jess. Now, this system, when we're out flying, we will take the jess out and put in a jess that's identical in every way except it has no slit to it. And the reason why is if you're flying your bird with this system and some emergency happens, it gets chased off by another hawk and you can't find it for some reason, then that jess, the bird, when it lands, it'll pick at it and it'll pull the jess out on its own. Now it only has this anklet on, and with weather and just picking at it, that will fall off on its own. There's nothing there that will inherently snag onto anything. Now, falcon flyers will often fly with just this anyways. They take off all the jesses and you only have anklets because a falcon is typically flying way overhead. You don't need jesses. But hawk flyers, we often use this slitless jess because you want to be able to hold on to your bird because you're flying off the fist. There's something, go get it. Oh, there's a species that you're anxious to pursue, but it's a species out of season or one that is dangerous, so I'm going to hold on to the jess so you don't go after that. This is particularly true with hunting with eagles. I've had many instances where I was in fields that seemed all open, no people around, and out of the blue, somebody comes with their dog running ahead, and my eagles lurched towards them, and it was only because my eagles were wearing a slitless jess that they weren't able to go after the dog because I was holding them down. So, but either way, my point is the equipment that we use is designed to keep the bird from getting tangled. It's designed to be as removable as possible by the bird should the bird escape. So if you see ridiculous oversized equipment, far too long, far too gangly, far too thick, there's a good chance that that could be from somebody who is practicing the sport illegally, has no permit, no experience, and no mentor showing them the proper way to do things. So always remember that. Now, I want to share kind of a sad story that sums up kind of why this is such a hot issue for me. Years ago, I had a wonderful peregrine falcon, a female Peel's peregrine, captive bred, and I had a very unique job situation that allowed me to fly her 3 times a day. Early in the morning, late afternoon, and right before sunset. She was as fit, I swear, as a wild bird. She was a great hunter. She would go up 1,000 feet and dive. It was wonderful. My mew was a very good mew, and it had a double door, which means you had to unlock a door to get in, then there's another door. You get in. While I was at work one day, somebody came in, either with a hacksaw or huge bolt cutters, cut through both locks, went into my mew, and released my falcon. I looked everywhere for it, and I had no idea. Like, is my bird roaming around the neighborhood, or somebody steal it and it's at their house? I had no way to know. So I spent several days looking, put the word out, no luck. About a month later, I was at the state wildlife agency, and I bumped into a wildlife officer, and he said, "Hey, Ben, how's your peregrine doing? Is she good now that you got her back?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he gave me a phone number. It turns out, just a couple of days after my bird had been released, somebody found it in a parking lot near my neighborhood, eating a seagull. They called the police, who called the wildlife agency. An officer came, stepped right up on the officer's hand without hurting him, and he looked at the band number, saw that it was my bird, got my information, took the falcon to a local wildlife rehabilitator, and said, "Hey, give this bird a good check over. Here's Ben Woodruff's number. Give him a call. Let him know you got his bird." Well, they never called me and never intended to. So we went over there. I called them up. I say, "Hey, I heard you have my bird." I went over there, and as I was doing paperwork and getting the bird, I look over. My falcon is in a crate. They had been keeping it in a wooden crate about this wide by this tall, so about a 1.5 by 1.5 by 2 feet. And it was bam, 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 jumping. She was jumping and freaking out. That's where they had been keeping her. And while I was doing paperwork, my wife was talking to some of their volunteers, and they said, "Oh yeah, we they weren't going to call you up because they were hoping to just kind of keep it hush hush and say, 'We have this bird that we don't know where it's from,' and transfer it to their education permit." So now I ended up taking the bird, of course, get home, found that from that jumping in that crate, the bird's keel bone was shattered to pieces, infected, internal bleeding. The bird had to be put down, which is a very tragic ending. Now, I don't say this to rip on rehabilitators. I work with many rehabilitators here in Utah that are wonderful. And in fact, this particular rehabber has had his permits revoked years ago for other reasons. But I wanted to share that because after I got the bird back, had to have it put down, all of a sudden, some photos started to circulate. Bird watchers had seen this. Wow, a peregrine falcon in a neighborhood with jesses. Oh, those horrible falconers. Oh, look at that. It was my bird. And these pictures started circulating and getting spread to other states and being used as a way to rip on falconers as being irresponsible with their birds. So I went on there and politely and diplomatically tried to explain the whole story of what had happened. And most of the bird watchers were very understanding once they knew the whole story. But how often do you know the full story? Usually not. So the one thing I just want to say is if you or somebody else or online you see images of a bird with jesses, whether they're appropriate jesses or totally illegal jesses that no falconer would use, if you see that, don't assume you know the whole story. And don't assume that it must be a regular good falconer being irresponsible. It might be, but there's a lot of other things it could be as well. Well, I hope this was of interest. It's a little bit of a rant, not as educational as some of my other videos, but I hope you still find it useful. Feel free to share it with anybody you like. And as always, check out my other videos, and happy hawking.